Hello, it's Z here, and I hope you're enjoying some nice pre-spring weather. We definitely are over here in eastern New York, and the snow's all melted, and it's beautiful and sunny out. So I hope you guys are enjoying wherever it is that you are around the world and around New York State. So I just wanted to provide a little more information for this week and respond to some of the stuff I saw. I really liked pretty much everything that I saw happen this week. I think we're a lot more engaged and supporting each other and having some organic dialogue. And I see deep engagement with the reading. So this looks awesome, guys. Seriously, keep it up. On an interesting note, I noticed Michael cited a source which claimed music from Africa is learnt through oral transmission. I'm reading the quote, right? And utilizes improvisation opposed to purely reading music notation. Music notation for African music was introduced by Westerners who wanted to notate the music that was being made there in order to analyze it, United Academic Decathlon 2017. So actually, that type of factoid can be enormously helpful in reassuring students, right? So while we might be parsing out the appropriate cognitive next steps via MLT, maybe that's happening on the back end, or maybe we're presenting that to students too, like we got to do this and then that and then that. I think one way to help students is to create just a super strong and super safe learning environment. And for me, it all boils down to that fundamental level. So according to Bloom's depth of knowledge, that type of thing, one of the highest order cognitive tasks is that creative domain. And that's what this type of project, this type of work is. And, maybe we're trying to envision a really juicy, creative writing prompt for the students in these types of activities. So we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable stepping out of their maybe comfort zone or thinking of doing something in a different way, such that, if it gets really weird or it totally flops or whatever, it's completely and utterly fine, and everybody supports each other, and there's no gotcha, there's no, oh, but you didn't notate this correctly, or you don't know about key signatures, or you don't know how to use 3-2 time. It's not about any of those deficits. That's really a growth mindset. And yeah, maybe a fun fact like that, like, hey, you know what? In this part of the world, they didn't even use any of this, and they have amazing stuff there. So just offering that little tidbit, I think, could have a really good effect on the group. And, might be a nice little thing. Just take that and stick it in your back pocket. So thank you, Michael. A little bit of feedback on some more of Unit 3. Again, I really like what people are saying about modernism as a trend, intellectually speaking, and reaffirming, but also throwing a wrench into the regular sort of tonal and rhythmic functions that music educators work so hard to instill in grades P through 12. So there's some tension and contradiction there. And sometimes it's reaffirming, sometimes it's just totally throwing it, baby with the bathwater, so to speak. So on the one hand, an atonal piece, for instance, can really confound our tonal expectations in the listener's ears, students and adults alike. For instance, how would we sing Pierrot Lunaire in movable do? Like, that's a big, it's impossible. How could we recite George Crumb's graphic scores in Gordon's rhythm syllables if there's no time signature? So some of these pieces were intentionally created with keeping in mind, trying to smash some or shatter some preconceptions and to try to be shocking. And I think that's a parallel in visual art, that's a parallel in literature, and so we got to think about that a little bit in music if we're going to start citing some of those pieces of our literature or repertoire. So yeah, in some ways one could argue that it might short circuit all the brilliant learning theory things which have been applied successfully to the music learning process. But on the other hand, we can see it as an interesting or exciting challenge. How can we garner a deeper understanding of this newer literature? So another possible crossover that came to my mind in all these discussions was the music learning theory material that's very rich and available for modes, right? So it's not all about just major and just minor, natural minor, harmonic minor, ascending melodic minor. There's also the modes, and Gordon does have some materials for several modes, Mixolydian, Phrygian, and those are typically thought to be trickier, to be higher rigor, so they are further along in the process. but it could be enormously helpful for teaching modern or postmodern repertoire. So if you're looking at David Lang, Julia Wolf, some of those more postmodern bang on a can school composers, a lot of times they sort of revert or harken back to the old modes like Mixolydian and Dorian. And so if you're brainstorming about sequences or plans, one could totally run some of the MLT tonal pattern exercises in the modes before and after doing a listening or a studying or analysis of said repertoire. Now, when it comes to avant-garde music, say the John Cage, the Pauline Oliveros, the other sonic artists, they might be working with just various bits of miscellaneous sounds rather than discrete pitches. And it may also be randomized or left to chance or serialized. Those are the terms that those composers used in those cases. And so that's really one of the places where I feel like space audiation needs to come in and help us, and one of the reasons why I assigned it as our course text. We have to rely on, if anything, if there's going to be a linkage there, we're going to have to rely on space audiation, I would wager, in order to approach sonic phenomena, such as sonic art. It's very ethereal. I acknowledge that. And as I said before, being able to approach this type of material, it's super rich, super rigorous, and also like really ethereal and kind of out there. It's going to require really strong classroom culture and just expectations of high rigor that we're in this together, and let's figure out what happens in this music, in this sonic art, etc. So, Gordon concludes in his famous quote, "Music is not a language but a literature." And so if you take it back towards ELA, language literature, the spondy analysis that we're using in analyzing Virgil's Aeneid, for instance, is definitely not going to work on E.E. Cummings, right? Doesn't mean both of those texts are not in the curriculum for literature in the classrooms. So our challenge, pragmatically, has got to be to see which texts we could include and present confidently to students and see how it impacts them, adjust the instruction from there. And also, I think it's also a mandate to stay in the loop with emerging learning theory research to find out ways that maybe we can implement to parse out all of that new information in a scaffolded and developmentally appropriate way. So just one really tiny example, I had a lovely experience where some first graders enjoyed choreographing a movement, just a sort of free-flowing creative movement, informal, semi-informal piece based on a piece of very crunchy atonal 20th century music, which is The Adventures of Tom Thumb by Ruth Crawford Seeger. So it was a sort of a fairy tale told with a narrator, kind of like Peter and the Wolf, but super crunchy, super atonal. And so the pitches, were highly serialized and highly atonal, and those rows of all the 12 different pitches, right? It's like highly regulated and didn't make too much tonal sense in that way, in that specific way. However, the rhythm was pretty idiomatic, following along with the storyline and kind of gelled in a very unsurprising way. And I think that in that case, my children in that class caught the drift of the storyline and really enjoyed being able to work along with a sort of funkier or different soundtrack that they were able to use to act out their story in the creative movement time of that day. And we had a really good time, and I think it was a rigorous application of what we were trying to do in that lesson, and was appropriate because we were hitting around this time of year, so we had everything, routines and practices, and our sort of big goals of the year were in place, and we were in a very productive time of the year. So that was just one other interesting thing that we added into our practice. So what I just said above just a few minutes ago, may or may not be a little controversial within MLT, and the idea of having to harmonize atonal music and learning theory. So if I could ask everyone to refer to Natalie Stormer's very smart response to Unit 3, maybe just go back and put your 2 cents on that thread, even though I know we've passed Unit 3. Go ahead and throw your 2 cents in on that discussion. I kind of reformulated a question And the debate that I proposed, based on Natalie's thought, is this. Gordon's quoted as having said, "There's no such thing as atonal music." On the other hand, Bernstein says meaning in music is very elusive. So is our modernist music and MLT 100% incompatible, or somehow compatible? And why or why not? So be very curious to see if you guys can reach back to Unit 3 and engage with that. Oh, P.S. There's a really pretty amazing debate between Gordon and Reimer that you can listen to online. Just search for the Reimer-Gordon debate on music learning. So that's Reimer, R-E-I-M-E-R, hyphen, Gordon, G-O-R-D-O-N, debate on music learning. And it's not exactly this topic, but they sort of really go at it in terms of the axiomatic things about what's important, what's not important when it comes to music learning, and the differences in their two approaches really stands out. And again, it doesn't necessarily go into tonal versus atonal, but I think it's very interesting to see Gordon representing himself and representing MLT when confronted with something that may or may not be, harmonized with that whole perspective. But anyway, before I digress too much, let's chat a little bit about Unit number 4 before we run out of time. Really rich discussions. Keep it up. I urge you to find a point of discussion or maybe even disagreement with classmates. That can be a really fruitful juncture for everyone to say, hey, I really don't understand where this is coming from, or I'm not sure if I agree with this particular thing, and, do you mean this or do you mean that? And you never know if you could really just respectfully disagree. Like, I just completely just don't agree with that. Sorry, but, here are my references. Here's what I think. And I think that this is perfectly compatible. I think this is completely incompatible. And I think it'll be really interesting to just give some space for that. It's still positive. It's still, where it's team effort here. But it can bring up sources, right, that the other person has never seen or considered. It could bring in external sources, or it could bring us deeper into the class texts. So please feel free to cause a little bit of drama. Well, not drama, but you know what I mean. And let me see. Anything else? Oh yeah, the takeaways of the rhythm discussion were really interesting. The benefits of the organic feeling and that experiential aspect were very appropriate in my opinion. And we all have those memories as teachers and as learners where we got the rhythm, where we felt grounded in the rhythm. It was embodied, and that can be a really amazing experience on the student-facing side. On the other hand, there were points about the rigors of using a consistent and standardized rhythmic system and how important that is intellectually, cognitively, etc. And so one person even expressed interest in doing some experimental research on rhythmic systems and how that impacts achievement, and that's totally cool. That would be really awesome. I would recommend consulting the extant literature carefully before attempting that, but it sounds like a great thesis idea. And last thing, free-flowing movement was cited a couple times, and in a lot of ways that can be easier said than done for kids, right? So I know some people mentioned at a certain age, on the older side, kids can become self-conscious, and it requires breaking a lot of ice and building a really strong and safe classroom culture where movement can be explored, because suddenly it's all about social implications and whatnot. And then littler kids, developmentally speaking, may be less inclined towards that slower and more continuous free-flowing motion. And so I don't have a citation on me at this time, but I've seen some data that shows especially younger children enjoying fast and stochastic motion. You see that in their instrument practice and in their movement practice. So how can we encourage continuous flowing? We're going to use scarves, or we're going to use resistance bands, we're going to use metaphors. How can we show that tension and release? And in my experience, I also like to use metaphors like maybe a theme of underwater or in space, something where gravity is not working in the normal way. And that can be a really fun theme movement segment that can be incorporated to really ground that foundation in the free-flowing movement, and to really give a contrast that touches into Laban as well. You can always ask me more about that. You can send me any questions or schedule office hours, zotique@buffalo.edu. So take care and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.